Chapter 6. Unwelcome Visitors. Hare was really tired after a night of storytelling. They had sat up all night telling stories until the stars had closed their curtains and extinguished their candles. The last story told was the one about Crawler and how he had been the cause of the great battle of the grannies, which still upset him and had really been the reason for his coming to Africa in the first place. He had become too well known in England. Hadn't his face appeared in all the daily papers? He was happy here in this quiet camp in the middle of an African wilderness. Here old ladies were few and far between, and certainly not likely to poke umbrellas at him and exclaim, "There's that awful toad!" It was early afternoon, and they basked lazily in the dappled shade of the baobab tree, drinking Brer Rabbit's excellent white wine, which was served chilled in long-stemmed glasses. Ah, this was the life! Abba was making a new bow very carefully, testing its strength as he completed each new phase. "Tell me," sighed Hare, "can you feel anything strange in the atmosphere? I fancy I can hear whispering, but then ears can play strange tricks." "No," said Crawler, sleepily blinking towards the leaves. "It's nothing, I'm sure." Above their heads, herons' broods started to count. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, over and over again. They had become used to the noise that the young birds made and took no notice. Little by little, the sky grew darker, and it was as though a great silent storm was approaching them from the desert. Abba screwed up his wise brown eyes and surveyed the darkening horizon. "An eclipse!" cried Crawler. "A storm!" growled Lion. "A great balls of fire thunderer!" cried Brer Rabbit. "And I can't stand lightning!" "Silence!" cried Abba, waving his small brown hand for silence, and he dropped suddenly to his knees, pressing his ear to the ground and listening. "It is none of these things. It is locusts." He could hear the scratching and scuffling of a million tireless wings, dry and rasping like dead tree bark beating in the wind. He listened to the crunch of countless grinding jaws, nature's chainsaws, eating their way relentlessly forward, mile upon mile. "The baobab! The baobab!" they cried. "She will be torn to shreds, her blossoms lacerated and her leaves munched up." "What shall we do?" chorused all the occupants of the baobab together, making such a din that Abba had to leap up and shake a branch to bring them to their senses. "How can I tell you when you make so much noise?" he cried. "Hurry, hurry!" cried the chameleon. "Do as Abba says." And he went about slowly rallying support for his friend. "First, we must dig a shallow trench all around the baobab tree and fill it with brushwood, ready to burn. The smoke from the fire should cause the locust to fly over the tree without landing. The hot coals will burn up any that approach her on foot," Abba told them. The hares and the lion began to dig, and Crawler ran about, gathering armfuls of brushwood, and laid it in the trench. They were quite exhausted when the task was completed, and the tree was ready for the siege. A few locusts began to arrive, but the main swarm still several miles away. "When they strike, we will have to wave blankets and any other object to try to prevent them from settling and landing here. It will not be easy," said Abba, making a small fire from which to kindle the brushwood. "When I say go, take these burning twigs and set fire to the brushwood." The baobab waited for the unwelcome visitors to descend from the skies, and the animals and birds spoke in whispers. Even the baby herons, who were usually so raucous, counted softly with little chirps. 1, 2, 3, locusts for tea, 100 for you and 1,000 for me, as children will when there is an air of excitement about. When they came rushing down in a great cloud that seemed to blot out the sun. They were everywhere, heavy and clumsy, banging into poor Crawler and causing him to howl, while he tried to keep his twig alight and run with it at the same time. In the end he gave up and sat sobbing quietly. "Poor old baobab, poor old me, poor old toad and poor old tree," he cried, and tried to prevent their spiny legs from catching in his shirt and cravat as he fought them off, tossing them in the fire, which, thanks to lion and hare, was burning fiercely and to good effect. The din and smell of roasting bodies was quite horrific, and Crawler's nerves were quite overstretched. He was really more sensitive than he appeared, and Hare felt sorry for him and left the fire for a moment to cheer him up. There, the worst of the attack is over. The main swarm has passed over us and has gone on to attack the bushes in the ravine down there. Cheer up, they are not likely to come back this way. Abba assures me they make a very tasty morsel when roasted, and we can all have quite a feast when it is over." "Disgusting," cried Crawler. "How can you possibly eat such horrid-looking creatures?" "They eat snails in France, you know," said Hare, and closed the subject firmly. They spent a long time tidying up and piled the bodies in a heap. "The news will soon be out, and all the birds for miles around will fly in to share the feast," said Abba, filling in the trench with his feet. "We have saved our tree. You were all a great help. Thank you." "Hip, hip, hooray," they all shouted, and then sang, "For he's a jolly good fellow," to Abba, who in turn said that everyone deserved a medal. "Let us call upon Secretary Bird to write out a certificate for all these brave strangers. We will call it the Order of the Baobab, awarded for courage and service to the community," cried Chameleon. They all agreed, and Secretary Bird stepped proudly forward to take down the particulars in shorthand. In flew the birds. What a noisy party! There were crested barbets, bockmackerries, bee-eaters, herons, 2 crested hoopoes, and last but not least, in his courteous garments, came the fiscal shrike to keep an eye on everything and make sure each bird had a fair share of the spoils. The animals sat down for a welcome cup of coffee. They were covered in ash and dust and were very hot and sticky after all their exertions. Nobody could quite say when the old man appeared in their midst, though Hare had the strongest impression that he had stepped from the fire when it was at its fiercest. He stood leaning on the tree, watching the preparations and general hubbub, and he kept grinning and rubbing his hands together, muttering to himself. He was very odd, but nobody thought it strange when he sat down and accepted a cup of their coffee. The old man blew down his pipe and began to fill it from a long leather pouch stained black with much use. "Smell the baccy," he hissed, passing it around. "Oh, my throat," gasped Crawler. "It shouldn't be allowed. Smoking is dangerous." "I am dangerous, so they tell me," said the stranger darkly from under his slouch hat, "though I try to give the lost ones a feeling of belonging somewhere. I am the good excuse for the foul deed dreadfully done on a dark night, though I could be on the other side of the world at the time. Yet they will turn and blame me. The cowards! Instead of facing the music, they shout, 'The old man tempted me,' and he drew upon his pipe until they had difficulty in breathing because of the clouds of smoke." "He's a strange one," hissed Crawler into Hare's ear. "Hush," whispered his friend. "Look at his pipe." The bowl of the pipe was as big as a man's hand. It looked as if it could burn for a week once lit. It was a honey gold in colour and carved out of bone, with a great ornate silver lid on hinges at the top to stop the sparks from flying skywards on the gusty plain. The stem was straight and long, and he held it at arm's length, drawing the heady aroma deep into his ancient lungs. "When they threw me out," the old man cried, "they took away my dreams, and now instead of dreaming as you do, I smoke the nights away until the dawn, and the cicadas call me to my retreat, not far from here at Devil's Kloof." Nobody answered him. They just eyed him from the corner of their eyes and glanced quickly away. "It's been an excellent day," he said. "I do like a bad fire. It does my black heart good to see it. Pity you worked so well." "I do like a disaster to be complete. It is so untidy when it is only half a disaster, don't you think?" Crawler was fidgeting. He kept clearing his throat and trying out the odd note. This did not seem to please the old man at all. He blew several mouthfuls of thick smoke in his direction. "I do hope it is not your intention to sing, Mr. Frog," he said. "I detest the singing of frogs. I have to listen to them all night long. During late daylight hours I expect some peace and quiet." "I am about to sing an aria from Tosca," said Crawler crossly. "I shall sing. I am well known in the world of opera. I must sing." "Then you do so at your own peril," said the dark stranger, and turned away. "I am about to sing to you all," cried Crawler. There was a sudden hush, and he took his stand on a large root. Striking a pose, he began. The first notes sounded sweet and true, until he reached the top, and there he stuck. He sang on and on and on the one note. It remained fixed in the trembling air. The animals covered their ears. The birds flew away in a flock, and the insects became quite silent. Only Crawler's note remained, high, piercing, deadly. He grew distressed and very red in the face. Hare looked about him, sensing that this was the threat of the stranger taking effect. He grabbed his pipe from him and told Crawler to draw upon it, which the poor toad did. Crawler began to cough and cough from the acrid smoke. The spell was broken and the note ceased. The old man gave his explanation. "I did what any self-respecting fallen angel would do," he said, when faced with such a situation. "I fixed his whistle, top-notch, invariable, like a car hooter, stuck and wailing its thin blue scream on the morning air. It was superb. No tenor has ever held such a note. I, Lord Lucifer, did it." And he laughed until the tears rolled down his cheeks and hissed at his feet. "Lord Lucifer, eh? Now we know with whom we are dealing. You shall pay for this," shouted Hare, beside himself with rage. "I'll not have a friend of mine, a poor defenceless creature, treated in such a fashion. You are cruel and unfeeling. I challenge you to a duel. Name your weapons." "Rubbish," said the dark tormentor. "By dawn I shall be miles away, and we cannot fight a duel in the dark, silly rabbit." Ha, you fiend! I am an ancient, honourable hare, so there." "Sew on buttons," said Lucifer, and proceeded to do up his cloak, and picked up his pipe, which he knocked out on a root. He turned to gaze upon the ancient tree that towered before him, and leaning back, extended his arms. "By the pyrodynamics invested in me," he cried, "be completely consumed. Not by the myriad locust hosts, but by fire." The animals watched, horror-stricken, as one leaf bent and curled, a thin smoke rising from its edges, and then another and another fell to the mercy of the liquid flame. Then he casually stepped into the fire and was gone.